Hi, my name is Carl Pearson, and this video explains my expectations that a federal statute will be enacted in 1920 or 1921 more probably that provides a national moratorium on evictions from residential rental properties, whether they be a house, apartment, co-op, or condo rental. I'm going to assume that you have reviewed my 24th video on foreclosure moratoriums, which would be helpful for you to better understand parts of this video. I'm 83 years old, a high school dropout. I received my BA magna cum laude in political science. I'm a graduate of Harvard Law School and have been a small business owner for 74 years. Also, I ran or sought nomination on major third-party tickets for New York Attorney General, New York City Mayor, and U.S. President. Also, I have defended foreclosure actions for the past 20 years. Today is my 54th day of self-imposed quarantine or stay-at-home lockdown. We have more than 1,300,000 confirmed cases and 77,000 deaths due to the coronavirus. I'm most vulnerable and take quarantine quite seriously. State and federal moratorium laws were enacted during the Great Depression, but the circumstances today are quite different because, one, we now have a politically deadlocked federal government unable or unwilling to pass needed legislation. Two, during the Great Depression, 27 states enacted the main moratorium laws because the banks were then allowed to operate in only one state, whereas today the large banks with their interstate branch banking are no longer primarily regulated by state law. Three, the current and threatened economic crisis is much, much worse than the Great Depression, already with 60 million unemployed and underemployed persons. Four, there is no World War II to pull us out of the Depression. Five, infections and social distancing eliminates many people from participating in the job market, whereas men and women were able to work in World War II. Also, more parents will have to remain at home with their children because of school closings and vacations. Six, there's an inability to work and a diversion of able workers due to the coronavirus pandemic. Seven, a split in public opinion, which to a significant extent is against the economic interests. To put it another way, there seems to be many voters and residents who are willing to lose their homes if their political party wants it that way. Unlike the Great Depression, where most homeowners really wanted to save their homes. 8. The Great Depression failed to enact anti-eviction laws to the extent of that they were able to enact foreclosure moratorium laws. That's important, that there really wasn't a lot of laws prohibiting evictions of renters. So this is the background for my efforts now to figure out what should and can be done and how. The banking system today in 2020. States are not allowed to interfere with the federal banks, and the federal banks do not have to qualify to do business in any state. Most of the residential rental properties have mortgages made or now owned by federal banks or by one of the two quasi-governmental agencies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Important facts. There are 44 million renters, and 47% of them already have exhausted the $400 they had on average in savings for an emergency. So on average, 44 million renters are broke. Unemployment and underemployment, and that's even if they got the $1,000 or so. Many of them haven't received it, and the minute it is received, it's gone anyway. Unemployment and underemployment is an estimated 60 million and increasing by 3 million of the employed persons each week. Claim limiting, with others wanting to make their claims but prevented by rules and regulations from doing so. Almost half of renters, what I meant by that was that the various states have adopted rules to prevent people, make it harder for people to make claims, and therefore 3 million claims in that week really would have been a hell of a lot more had this effort at stopping claims not been adopted in various states. Almost half of renters spend more than a third of their income on their rent, assuming they still have their jobs, and 50% spend more than 25%. Now, tens of millions of renters can't pay their rent and will be evicted through no fault of their own unless a federal moratorium statute is enacted that provides a moratorium on evictions during the pandemic. Some states are taking the lead because of the lack of federal legislation. New York State's Governor Cuomo ordered a 90-day moratorium on evictions, which ends on June 20, 2020, and on May 7th he announced that he's extending his no eviction order until August 20, with a suggestion that he may extend his order once again or even beyond that. Renters now owe about 3 months of back rent, which they are unable to pay, so that the threat of eviction is only adding to their burden, unless a federal moratorium and forgiveness program is enacted. The rent moratorium should be automatic, without requiring any proof of financial status or being a victim of the coronavirus. The moratorium needs to take effect immediately and automatically as a bailout for the most vulnerable part of our country. The average rent is $1,500, and when multiplied by 44 million, we see that the monthly cost would be $66 billion, or somewhat less per month if you take into account deducting for A, high-end luxury rentals, and B, this statute could be assigning some costs to the largest property owners who would then receive little or no federal subsidy, and in that way the $66 billion could be brought down somewhat, but probably not below 50 or 60 billion a month. The federal legislation needed today to save many millions of renters from eviction. I'll discuss that now. HUD, HUD, states that there are 44 million rental households in the U.S. and that these rental units are in 22.5 million properties. We need to see how to stabilize the renters as well as the owners of the properties and the banks which are secured by mortgages on the properties. This seems to be far more complicated than stabilizing mortgages and homeowners who reside in the property. Than stabilizing mortgagor homeowners who reside in their property and the mortgagee banks. So those would only be two entities or two types needing a resolution. But with rentals we have a third person because the owner doesn't live in the property. So here is what I believe has to take place in 2020 with bipartisan enactment, or in 2021 more realistically, after experiencing a far more deteriorated economy by whoever is elected in November 2020. 1. A federal moratorium with some forgiveness on residential rental evictions for no more than 2 years or until the pandemic is resolved. 2. A reduction of rental rates to enable some of the renters to continue paying their rent, but at a substantially reduced amount, to get as much renter payments as possible to the property owner, and to make it easier for the property owner to pay its expenses and mortgage payments, and lessen the amount of subsidy by the government. 3. To make the changes quickly, the changes will have some degree of automatic applicability, with a mechanism for verification and resolving disputes. 4. Federal payments directly to the property owner to make up the necessary part of the monthly rentals that are being forgiven, at least temporarily, by the relief being granted to the renters. 5. Federal payments directly to the mortgagee bank to make up the necessary part of the monthly mortgage payments not being made by the mortgagee property owner because of the relief being granted to the renter and property owner. 6. Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae as quasi-governmental agencies owning some of the outstanding mortgages will be easier to get in line, but will also need funding to avoid economic collapse. 7. It seems that the three interests should reach an agreement as to the relief for each and submit the application for immediate acceptance and relief, subject to review and change. 8. Lurking around all this is the constitutionality of any losses suffered by the banks and property owners as to the difference in what they forego and what they are paid by the federal government, or perhaps the issue of whether a federal moratorium law as to rental evictions and whether forgiveness and or devaluation of the obligations is constitutional. So, in summary, the renters, mortgagor property owners, and mortgagee banks need relief, including an automatic eviction moratorium for the renters, and the federal government will need to prevent the mortgagor property owners and mortgagee banks from failing by appropriate subsidies or bailout. Reducing the monthly rentals will encourage more rentals to make monthly rental payments once again. And a jobs program right away would substantially help in stabilizing the residential rental markets and improving the nation's economy. Well, that was complicated, but I've said what I plan to say, and I'll say so long until my next video.